Hello everyone, and welcome. Simon Jacobson here, speaking to you from the Holy Land, the Promised Land, the land that flows with milk and honey, with all the paradoxes of this beautiful country. And this class, we will be speaking about Vanity Fair, which many of you may know by the name of the magazine. Some of you may know it from the classic work of William Makepeace Thackeray. I always like that, Makepeace. A 19th century classic novel. Some call it a social satire. Some call it social philosophy. But a powerful book about the vanities of life. And some may know Vanity Fair from their own experiences. Or, if you want to use Jewish sources, we can always talk about vanity in the context of the book of Kohelet, which begins, Hevel Haval, and vanity, vanity, all is vanity. And the reason I'm discussing this topic is because in the continuation of our series, as we honor and celebrate the 200th Yahrzeit, the 200th anniversary of the passing of the Alter Rebbe. And last week I discussed at length the psychology, the new psychology of the Alter Rebbe. The previous week I spoke more philosophical and psychological. So I felt as a part of that series, we'll talk about vanity and vanity's role in our lives. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Is it the root of all evil? Is it a necessary evil? Is it something we have to obliterate? And many different questions about the word called vanity. So let's first define the word vanity. And maybe using Thackeray's best expression, his book is essentially a story of life. And he so brilliantly captures it in different characters. And it's really a story of vanity. So I think the conclusion of his book is a very interesting one. He concludes it, and I'm quoting right now, he writes, A vanitas vanitatum, in Latin. Which of us is happy in this world? Which of us has his desire, or having it is satisfied? Come, children, let us shut up the box and the puppets, for our play is played out. These are powerful concluding words of the book Vanity Fair. If you contrast it with the book of Kohelet, which we shall do a little later, that book ends in a very, very different way. It's also a book that talks about vanity, but in the case of Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, he ends his book, the end of the matter, when all has been heard, revere God and keep his commandments, for this is the entire man. Very, very different distinction between the two, and as we shall soon see, captures really the essence of, I believe, a very powerful message regarding vanity. But to go back to Thackeray's description, yes, this is the story of vanity. Most people pursue vanity. It's, whether it's shaped in the context of power or control or money, influence, respect, vanity is a big driving force in people's lives. And people will do many, many different things in the name of vanity. Vanity on a very basic level, if you ask yourself the question, how many hours do you spend in your lifetime? How many hours a day do you spend looking at yourself in a mirror? Now, I understand that most people don't spend an hour or two just staring at themselves in the mirror, but wherever they have the opportunity, we probably don't even notice how many times we look at ourselves in a glass, in a mirror. How are we perceived? Is this a completely unhealthy thing? Is it a petty thing? Is it an inferior, superficial? What is this thing called vanity? In Hasidic language, the word for vanity, one of the words that you could use is the word yesh. What is a yesh? Yesh literally means a being, but it really means more than that. It's an itness. It's a state of itness. And many could argue that this is really the root of all our problems. If people did not have vanity, we would not have wars, we would not have the competition, we wouldn't have the greed and the injustices that people perpetrate upon another, because people's vanity would not be getting in the way. Many can claim, many can argue, you could argue that vanity is the root of all our problems. The yesh. And Hasidic thought is much discussed about this yesh. The yesh. The expression sometimes used, ani va'afsiyeh, me and nothing else. That captures the essence of the yesh. If you want to use Richard Dawkins' terms, the selfish gene. It's all about me, me, me. Freud has his id. It's about the individual's selfish need, whatever it may be, whether it's temptation, whether it's desire, whether it's indulgence, whether it's pleasure principle, whether it's sexuality. But the bottom line is it driving me? I come first, everything comes second. A very strong argument can be made that this is at the heart of the human being and something that cannot be suppressed. You can tame it, you can try to control it. The question is, what do we do with this yesh? If you eliminate it, let's go with that argument, you may also end up with having no personality, because vanity also has the role of self-protection. When someone embarrasses you, you have a certain self-respect. If one did not have any vanity, zero, then you could also say we become doormats without even having the basic self-respect of who you are and what you are about yourself. So it says in the Talmud, and brought in Jewish law, that when it comes, even a Talmud Chacham, meaning a scholar who has humility, always has to have shminis shebeshminis, an eighth of some personality, some ego, in a healthy way. But something has to be there because we're not meant to be doormats. So, I don't know if you know the classic scene, just to use everything that we can in popular culture. Those of you that are Trekkies, that is a show called Star Trek, and people became avid fans, obsessive fans, they're called Trekkies. So there's one of the episodes with the Captain Kirk, where they're in outer space and all kinds of strange things happen. They go through some star storm or something like that, and as a result, Captain Kirk's personality breaks into two. One is his selfish, so-called animalistic side, and there's the other more rational, so his emotional, impulsive side, and the more rational and reflective side. And it's very fascinating how they meet each other. Where the selfish one is driven to protect himself, but without any intelligence. Fear consumes him. And the intelligent, reflective one is lacking a certain drive. You almost see a study in contrast. You see a study where you have a person lacking the ego, may have intelligence, may be very accomplished, may be very confident, but there's a certain lack of drive and ambition. And you can definitely make the case that we need vanity for who we are. If you cut vanity out of a human being, yes, you may cut out some of the negative stuff, but you'll cut out many healthy cells as well. So we have ourselves what we call a dilemma. What do we do with this ego? So there's many different ways and many solutions that have been suggested. As I said, some will say, and let's just break it into three schools of thought. Some will say this ego is the source of all problems. And yes, you can't eliminate it entirely. First of all, it's not possible. Second of all, it may not be healthy, as I just said. You need to have a certain measure of self-esteem, which is one of the reasons we say about Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses. We say that he was an Anav, not a Shafel. He was the humblest man that ever walked on earth. But in Hebrew, the word Anav, humble, is not the same word as Shafel, which means low self-esteem, or even a person whose annihilates himself. Because an Anav is someone who's fully aware of his qualities and his virtues, and yet he also recognizes that with humility that God blessed him with these gifts. And had someone else been blessed with these gifts, they would have maybe done better than I. A Shafel, on the other hand, doesn't even recognize any value of his own. Complete doormat, as I mentioned. So you can make the case that we have to have, this is one approach, you have to have the yesh, the ego, the vanity, but the vanity is one that has to be sublimated as much as possible, controlled, tamed. It's one approach. Another approach can be taken, no, we have to annihilate the ego. Some of the Far Eastern disciplines, especially more extreme ones, will say the ego is an illusion. The illusion of power, the illusion of control, the illusion of you acquiring. You have to give that up. And essentially you have to go into another world, another reality where you recognize the ego has no value, has no semblance. Some say you can reach that place, but you have to give up much of your life in this material world to do so. And a third approach is you just got to live with it. Try to channel it, as opposed to the first one that sees it as a force that needs to be tamed. This one says live with it, harness it as much as possible. So we have an approach where you do as much sublimation as possible. Number 2 is annihilating it. Number 3, just accept it as a fact of life. That's called a necessary evil. Just to distinguish between 1 and 3 that I just said, the number 1 is that no, you put a lot of work sublimating. You just don't want to completely destroy it. And number three, you actually accept it as a part of reality, and you just work with it and don't expect more of a human being. Which really leads me to number four, where someone will say you don't have to do anything about it. The selfish gene. No matter what you do, we end up being selfish human beings, and there's nothing you can do. So the first three at least talk about doing something. The third one just accepts it. The fourth completely even indulges in it. So I don't want to complicate matters more than necessary, but the bottom line is this a positive force? Is it a negative force? Is there anything positive in it? Vanity Fair. So to discuss this, and we're going to discuss a major contribution from the Alter Rebbe, founder of Chabad, the person who we are celebrating his 200th anniversary of his passing 2 weeks ago. A tremendous chiddush, as they call it, tremendous innovation and insight that is, I would say, up there, probably one of the most, I think, far-reaching and most profound insights in human beings and in the cosmic picture, and especially considering that it's coming from a Torah perspective. But before we get there, and we'll have a little suspense, I will build up the case by asking a few fundamental questions. I want to go back to the book of Kehelet. The book of Kehelet is a book called Ecclesiastes, which was composed by King Solomon. Now, the book of Kehelet, how does he begin the book? So let's read a little. This is the book of Kehelet. He begins, Hevel Havolim. Vanity of vanities, said Kehelet. Kehelet here refers to King Solomon. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What profit has man in all his toil? That he toils under the sun. What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done, and there is nothing new under the sun. For much wisdom is much vexation, and he who increases knowledge increases pain. All go to one place, all came from the dust, and all return to the dust. And this is just a taste of the beginning of the book of Ecclesiastes. And he goes on and on, an entire book, basically knocking the world, which actually caused the sages, the Talmud, to say and consider concealing this book and not making it part of the canon of Torah study or of the Torah books, because they said it has this elements of this resignation, and they felt it may not be appropriate. They obviously, at the end of it, they did accept it, which we shall discuss. But it's interesting. So that's one reason they gave. One reason they gave is to quote straight from them, and I'm reading from these sages. They said that they consider not including it in the canon because of its resigned sound. But what is the expression? They said it was because the words seemingly contradicted themselves. This is from Shabbat, Talmud and Shabbos 30b. Another reason they gave, because they found in it matters that seemed leaning towards heresy. This is the Medrash, Kehelet Rabbah, which, again, because it does not talk about hope, which is the essential message of the Torah, and it talks very knocking the world, this was why they considered banning it. And yet they still accepted the book. The reason is because of its ending that I read earlier. Because as they said, the end of it all, as opposed to Thackeray's, if you can say lahavdil, conclusion, which is very, very cynical, that we shall, the puppets have played out their act. Kehelet ends, the end of the matter is when all has been heard, revere God and keep His commandments, for this is the entire man. So Kehelet is a good place to begin discussing what is Vanity Fair, because Kehelet addresses directly this. It's a book full of vanity. Another classic line in there is, as I mentioned before, a generation comes, a generation goes, and nothing changes under the sun. The classic cynical statement where we say the more things change, the more they stay the same. Nothing is new under the sun. What are we really accomplishing that has not been accomplished before? Basically, as he keeps saying, vanity of vanities, and he repeats it many, many times. So what is the message in Kehelet? And why wasn't it banned? And is it consistent with the rest of the Torah? You find no one in the Torah this type of dismissal of basically all human accomplishment as being simply all vanity. Now you could say King Solomon was speaking to himself. He had gone through many challenges in his life, and he had indulged in ways that God was not satisfied with. And it could be he was just looking at his life and saying, this is all vanity. But this becomes a book on the Torah for all of us. And clearly it has to have a message that is critical. And again, of course, the conclusion of the book redeems the entire book because it tells you what the ultimate purpose is. Now, this book of Kehelet, some people read it on Sukkot, on Sukkos. Passover, some read the book of Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs. There's another book of King Solomon. And on Sukkot, some read Kehelet. On Shavuos, they read the book of Ruth, because it's connected to conversion and so on. But the connection to Sukkot, which is a holiday of celebration, seems odd. What is it connected to Kehelis? Kehelis is a book that does not bring celebration. So there are commentaries that find all kinds of associations of a verse here, but the general thrust of Kehelet is very depressing and does not bring simcha of dancing as we do on Sukkot. So there's another question into the pot. So what exactly is this book, and what does it tell us about vanity? And how are we supposed to look at it? Because based on this book, you can go back to the philosophical approaches I mentioned before, that this book follows very much like the Far Eastern thinking, that everything is vanity, and you just simply have to obliterate it, because it has no value. Or it's an approach where you, I mentioned before that you just have to live with it, but it has no value, it has no positive value. And as we shall see, that is not the case. Because the mere fact that we discuss it and we have vanities tells you that there's something in it. And we shall soon go there as well. Now there's an interesting medrash that says the following. That says that King Solomon, it discusses the three books that King Solomon wrote are the Song of Songs, the Book of Proverbs, and Kehelet. This book of vanity, we can call it. And they discuss what did he write first. But everyone agrees that Kehelet was written last. And the consensus, or at least one opinion, is that when he was young, he wrote the Song of Songs, because when you're young, you write songs. You're more romantic. In middle age, he wrote the book of Mishlei, Proverbs, because when you're middle age, you come to a place of thought, introspection, philosophy. And at old age, he wrote the book of Kehelet, resignation that comes with old age. So it's an interesting way of looking at it. But it just amplifies the question, what exactly is this point? This isn't just his own personal journey. It's the journey of all of us. As we read it, it's a part of the Torah. So here we enter into Reb Shneir Zalman's realm of thought, of understanding vanity and the ego in a really new way. And to the extent that once you hear what I'm going to be sharing now, one wonders how did Jewish scholars and how did Jewish sages understand it before Reb Shneir Zalman introduced this concept. Another interesting thing that I should mention is that he introduced it, this is the last days of his life. So he wrote what we call Negeret HaKodesh, a epistle, a letter. It's essentially an essay that was published in the 4th section of Tanya, chapter 20. It's classic called Igeres HaKodesh Siman Chav. So Igeres HaKodesh means the letters or epistles. So Tanya is made up of 5 sections. This is the 4th section, chapter number 20. And this has Tzemach Tzedek and other of the Alter Rebbe students write, Tzemach Tzedek was his grandson, that this was written Kodim Histalkusei, before he passed away, which means the last weeks of his life, which itself is quite amazing. It's a very profound, complicated essay, but there's one thing that I will read out to you and analyze. He speaks precisely about this element of the yesh. We human beings are a yesh. What does a yesh mean? Let's dissect it. A yesh is an entity that senses itself first. It's me. Everything orbits around me. But let's go further. What does this mean? What's the contrast? What would be something else? Something else would be, it feels it's part of a whole. It feels it originates from somewhere. We don't have that. Our logic tells us, our mind tells us that we were born to parents. But our sensation, our emotion, if someone says, do you feel that you're an extension of your parent? And I'm not getting down to the psychology part, that we're haunted by our parents psychologically. I'm talking about physically. Do you feel that you're literally in a physical extension of your parent. No. You feel that you were here. Moreover, you don't even feel that you're 20 years from the moment you were born and 20 years closer to death. We don't feel that we have a beginning and we have an end. While we exist, we feel we're endless. Now, mind, just I qualify again, our mind, of course, tells us nobody lives forever. We're all born to someone. But our feeling, our hergish, our yesh, is a feeling of yesh. And the words of the Alter Rebbe is yesh she'ein lo ilo v'siba. It's a yesh that does not feel it has a cause or a root. You know, a plant, if we were able to interview a plant, the consciousness of a plant is it's always attached to its root. And if you cut it from its root, it will wither. So yes, a plant may not have consciousness as we do, but it is cognizant in its own way constantly of its connection. Fish in the sea are completely aware of their source. When I say aware again, it doesn't mean they necessarily have consciousness like we do, but there is an element, they will not leave the sea. They know not to leave the sea because that's where their source is. We are the only creatures on earth that can do something self-destructive. No animal will do something self-destructive unless a human being corrupted it. Why? Because we don't feel connected. We can smoke, and through smoke where it says on the packet says you're killing yourself, no animal would ever do something that would ingest something that disturbs the flow of oxygen. We can mutilate ourselves. We can behave in ways, whether it's through physical food or other things that we absorb toxins, or we can choose, obviously, to be a healthy life. Why is this possible? Because we don't have a natural sensation that when you eat this piece of food, it's poisonous. Poisonous doesn't mean you die from it, but poisonous means that it's toxic to you. Because we're completely self-contained, we're not connected, we don't feel connected to our source. The Talmud tells the story with the fish, where Rabbi Akiva was asked, why are you Jews so committed to Torah? And he gives the analogy of a fox who was standing at the edge of a river, trying to coax the fish because he was hungry. He says, why are you living in the water all the time? Why don't you spend a little time, change of venue? And the fish said, we thought you're the slyest, the smartest creature in the forest. You're not that smart. As soon as we leave the sea, we die. This is our natural place. What do you tell us? It's our comfort zone. And we should try something new. So in other words, fish are constantly cognizant and aware of their source. It's we human beings that have the yesh. To the point we don't feel part of anybody else. We don't feel extension of anybody else. Now yes, we can love people, but we can also love selfishly. Yeah, you love people who are an extension of you. But we don't feel that we began somewhere and we're ending somewhere. Which creates this type of, you can call it illusion, or you can call it reality, which we'll shall discuss. It creates this self-absorbed consciousness that is the root of absolutely all injustices and inhumanities from man to man. But here is where the twist comes. Comes the Alter Rebbe and he says like this, that this yesh, where does it come from? Where do we have this feeling from? Now you could immediately say we have the feeling because God concealed his presence. So we're able to be selfish, greedy, self-contained, and it's not healthy. It's not real even. It's an illusion. Like he explains in Shai Yuchid V'Amun and Tanya also, book 2, he talks about the unity of existence with the divine energy. He says it's all energy. It's just concealed from us. So in the process of concealment, what happens is we begin to feel we're on our own. But had we been able to see, we would see that we're an organic component of a bigger reality, of a mosaic, including our parents, including other human beings. And we would then see that we're all arms and legs of one large organism. And just like it's inconceivable that the right hand should not hit the left hand, if it misbehaves, it's inconceivable that one human being should hurt another because you're hurting yourself. So basically, it's a collective mass blindness that we're unable to see the integral and inherent unity that connects us, like string theory, under the surface. That you can make that argument. And I would say that would be the argument until the Sager Sakedah Simachov. This Sager Sakedah, because here he writes not like this. The Alter Rebbe goes on and says, the mere fact that we can feel that we're self-contained comes, where from? Not from the concealment. It comes from atzmus. It comes from the true reality, what he calls the yesh ha'amiti, the true yesh. Not the created yesh, not the perceived yesh, the true yesh. What defines God? People always ask, okay, you're telling me the world cannot have created itself, just like a book needs dictates as an author, a painting dictates as an artist, musical composition dictates as a composer, a building dictates as an architect. So the universe, which is far more beautiful, far more musical, far more organized, far more structured, definitely has an architect, an author, a composer, and an artist. That's the argument. So people immediately, especially the real wise ones, say, okay, so then who created God? Same logic. Nothing can create itself. Who created God? But they're lacking an understanding is that we're not finding some type of cute way of saying that he needs a composer. God is not a composition. He's not a book. He's not a piece of art. He is a reality that's completely different. So however you twist it, at some point that first source, yes, has to be an entity that was not created by anything, or the words in the Tanya, and it goes, okay, there's mitziyuse ma'atzmuse. His mitzias, his existence, is self-generated. Really means is he doesn't need to exist as we understand existence. So his being is one that is just dictates itself. Reality dictates that it's real. Everything in this world is not real. Therefore, it's optional. Once it's here, it has a function. Someone put it here. But true reality, by definition, reality dictates reality. That means he's the only entity in existence, if you can call it existence, he's the only entity, if you can even call it entity, that has no source, that has no author. That's why he was able to create a yesh like us that also feels we have no author. So, yes, one answer given is that there's a concealment, which explains why do we not feel this yesh amiti? Why don't we feel the divine source? But the real explanation, how can we have such a feeling? Basically, the Alter Rebbe is asking a philosophical question without spelling it out as such. If something that feels its source, let's say fish in the sea, cannot create something that don't feel its source, because it itself, its personality is recognizing its source. You can't create something that you don't have. The fact that we, yesh, have a sense that we are on our own, that nothing in existence is that way. Animals don't feel that way. The spiritual angels don't feel that way. The higher spiritual worlds don't feel that way. The energy in containers in Atzilus and higher don't feel that way. So how would we have such an element in us? And the answer is fascinating, because the Yesh Amiti, the true reality, gave us this sense of vanity. But here's the key thing. It's not meant to remain that way. At the heart, our sense of self is not a bad thing. It is essentially a taste of what it means to be godly, where God is self-contained and he has a sense of self. Let me qualify again. It's not that he has a sense. If he's going to have a sense, it's going to be one that he self-made, essentially, meaning generated from within, and not from anything outside. Everything else recognizes its umbilical cord. So this is a fascinating chidush, because he's going and saying the thing that everybody would say, even the most lenient would say that this is the source of all problems, but they say you can't do anything about it. Others say you could do something. He's going and saying, even according to all of you that say that this could be a cause of problems, but there's at the heart of it, this mere fact that you feel this way comes from atzmus, a God that is a God that has no cause and no root, no ila v'siba is like a cause, no source, no cause. God forbid that precedes it. This gives us a whole new take on vanity. What's the new take? Vanity is, at heart, a creation that comes from God. The fact that we feel individualistic, chayecha koydmin, that you have to take care of your needs first. There's a bottle of water and you control it, and there's only enough for for one person. You need to drink it, not because you're egotistic and the selfish gene, because that's what God wants. I've given you life and I've given you identity, and take care of yourself. Nili. If I'm not for myself, who will be for me? Ani. So the ani is not a bad thing. The ani is the root of vanity. There's an I. You say Ein Nili. You don't say. You could say, who's this ani? Why are you suddenly bringing me into it? He says, if I'm not for myself, who will be for me? But then comes step 2. Step 1 establishes there's an identity. Now you don't want it to get out of control. So he's saying, imani la'atzmi, again, ani. If I'm only for myself, ma'ani, what am I? So now comes the hard work of 2 things. First of all, recognizing that as much as you're an identity, everybody else was also given this yesh. Everybody else was given this yesh, as the Mishnah says, that chayiv adam leimer, the human being was created as an individual. Why? Because a person is responsible to always say, the whole world was created for me. Bishvili nivra elam. Is there something more egotistic and vanity than that? It's all about me. But that's not the point. The Mishnah there is coming to speak about responsibility. God blessed you with unique strengths, and each of us has that ani, me. But then comes the point is to understand that ani is there to be harnessed. Number 1, to recognize there are other people, and each one has their particular unique qualities. That's why the Mishnah says, in Pirkei Avot, in the Ethics of the Fathers, that Ezu Chacham, who's the wise person? Halemid Mekol Adam, the person that learns from everyone. That means 2 things. Everyone has something to teach, everyone has something to learn. That means everyone has an ani, has a sense of self. That is a divine creation, as the Mishnah says. The Alter Rebbe goes further than the Mishnah, because the Mishnah doesn't say that the sense of yesh, that you feel you're self-made and you have no source, that comes out. The Mishnah just says that each of us was created in a unique way. You could say that leads to, logically, to the Alter Rebbe's point, and maybe that's part of the basis of it. I've never heard it stated that way, but perhaps. And then comes the second is to understand that everyone else around you also has it, and you need each other. So it's not just you're just completely self-contained, you have that sensation. And the second thing, and you need everyone else, and the fact that you don't feel that you need everybody else is because of a concealment. But the individuality comes from the etzem, from the source. And then comes the next element to realize that it's coming from the source. So 2 things you recognize. That there's other anis out there. There are other yeshes. There are other created realities, each one with their own consciousness. And you have to all join together. And number 2, that this mere fact, this fundamental point, that you sense yourself as ein le'ilah, without a cause, without a source, is coming from Atzmus. And the goal is to you to connect to that. Not to become a fish in the sea and says, oh, you know what, I'm completely subjugated. That's an important step too. But you want to ultimately come to a point, I'm subjugated like a fish in the sea, connected to my source. Yes, I'm aware of it now. But I still don't lose my identity, because the Yesh Amiti, the ultimate identity, God's integral so-called value, where he has no cause and no thing that is causing him to be, is become part of you. And when Mashiach comes, we ultimately can unite the 2, as it says in the Biyuri Hazar from the Mittler Rebbe. This is coming from the Alter Rebbe again, that the Yesh HaNivra becomes one with the Yesh HaMiti. That the created Yesh, which means our sense of self and ego, personality, becomes one with the Yesh HaMiti, which is the ultimate so-called ego of the divine ego. I don't want to use the word ego in that sense, because ego has negative connotation. So I want to emphasize ego, we mean here that sense of self-generated reality. And therefore, we have here a whole new take on the whole picture. And this brings us back now to Kehelet and to the entire story. And again, the study and contrast between Thackeray's Vanity Fair and Kehelet. Both talk about vanity. And Thackeray concludes, as I said, vanitas vanitus vanitum vanitutum. Sounds a little Hebrew, actually. That we see how generation after generation comes, and it's basically the same old story. Which of us is happy in this world? Which of us has his desire? In the Talmud, in the words of the Medrash, Ein Adam mes b'chesed tavasa b'yadeh. There's no person on earth that dies, and that half of his desires were not fulfilled. Meaning that less than half of his desires are fulfilled. So that's the conclusion. In Kehelet, however, what King Solomon is coming to, the wisdom of older age, is not to annihilate the world. If he didn't have that last verse, Kehelet would probably have been bad. Or I would say it definitely been bad. But because he comes to the last verse, he's coming back and saying, All this is to show you how the world on its own is empty and vain. But if you connect it to its source, like he says, the words that he uses, the end of the matter when all has been heard, Seif Kol Dover, revere God and keep His commandments, for this is the entire man. So now you recognize that the vanity on its own is empty, then the vanity becomes elevated. Because you could say, you know what, they should have banned the rest of Kehelet and just given us this last verse. Or a few verses that make it make sense. No. Because it's important to know that we live in a world where there's vanity, that vanity is rooted in a divine place, but then we have to come to discover that it has no value of its own. It's not coming from us. Even though you feel self-made, but your mind leads you to say, but I did not have this, because how could I have created myself? And this brings me to this week's chapter, Pare. He said to Moses, I am the Iri, to me is this is the river, and I have created myself, because they didn't look up to heaven, the Talmud says. In Egypt there's no rain. The fields are irrigated from the river Nile, so they still worship the river Nile. They said, Lieri, I own it. When you have to look up to heaven, there's at least the humility that there's something, a source higher than you are. Even if you don't feel that you came from heaven, but at least you're looking at it. They didn't even look to heaven. They looked at the ground. They looked at the water. To the point that they said, this is us. We've created all this. Subtly, what it means in a person's service is the verse, the powerful verse that the Smag, one of the great codifiers, writes, that this is actually one of the 613 prohibitions, says, do never say, that my power, my self-generated effort, the ultimate, yes, my power, the strength of my hands, have generated this chayil. But we just said we feel that way. Yes, you feel that way. Look at people in business. Look at people who are successful. It's very hard for them to just say it's a blessing. I mean, I'm not talking about lip service. Let's talk about how much charity they give. If it's really not yours, you should be giving it away. And again, even there, the mitzvah of tzedakah is not to give it all away. You have to definitely keep for yourself. It says, al yavazbez, a person should not splurge and give away all his money. That's not the way of a healthy person. Except, like he explained and qualifies in Tanya, if you're giving it to save your life, then a person can give even more than a chaimish, which is 20%. Usually it's 10%. Because charity is not meant to annihilate what you've achieved. It's meant to teach you that what you've achieved is not yours. So like the expressions we find, for example, many places you'll say, Al Yishal Chacham B'Chachmaseh. Or Hevel, we say in the Eshet Chayil we sing Friday night. We say, Sheker Achein Ve'Hevel HaYefi. How false is grace and how empty. Hevel, same word, Hevel HaYefi, which is the book of Proverbs. Maybe it's beginning the prelude, because Eshet Chayil is at the end of the book of Proverbs. Maybe it was beginning the glimmers of what would come with Hevel Havolim in the book of Kehelet. So the end of Proverbs has the same word Hevel. Sheker Achein Ve'Hevel HaYefi. But then we look in the Torah, and it says, and then the verse, of course, ends like the back of Kehelet ends. Ki'im isha yiras Hashem hitisal. Sheker achein, grace is false. Hevel hayefi, empty. Vain is beauty. Ki'im, rather, it is isha yiras Hashem, a woman that is God-fearing. That's what you should praise. But then we find in the Torah, you find, what do you mean? Eishes Yefas Mara, Yefas Tayar, you talk about Sarah, Rivka, Rachel. They're described as beautiful. Beautiful in their structure, beautiful in their look, as a quality. Chen, just like Yefi is beautiful, Chen. Noach Matzah Chen Be'inei Hashem. Noach found favor and grace in God's eyes. Chen is a beautiful thing, a person that gives off charm. So why is it only the verse saying, Hevel HaYefi? Sheker hachein hevel hayefi, false. On their own, if you're going to give materialism value of its own, it is empty, worthless, mortal. Everything is eroding and dying. But if you say Yisha Yiras Hashem, that's why the verse still says the opening. Then you come back and say, then the chen and the yefi, the grace and the beauty are not hollow. Now they're infused with the divine. So we're not negating the rest of we're not negating the inner value of beauty and sense of self and so on. We're negating its feeling of being disconnected from anything except itself. But once you're recognizing its source and you recognize others that you're connected with, then it imbues the chen and the yefi. In the book of Kehelah, then, the rest of the book, that he said everything is vanity, it's vanity as long as you don't see the soul within it. So Judaism is not rejecting or in any way neglecting the material world. Because if it was, then you'd say, you know what? Eat to the minimum. Don't get involved in this material world, because all it does is feed the ego and feed material indulgences and so on. No, the Judaism says, go enter the world of lies, sheker, enter the world of vanity, and recognize that the vanity itself comes from an atzmisdika place, from a core place. Recognize that your identity, that individuality that you have, is truly a divine force. So this is a fascinating turning the whole concept on its head. This doesn't take away any of the places that discuss that we need to have humility, obviously, and so on. It all comes together, but there's another component here, that your individuality is very much part of the whole picture. And it's a critical part, because that's the atzmus within you. So we have what we call giluyim within us, we have within us, which is our sense of connection, our sense of bittul, a sublimation of humility. But then there's a self, and that self we're connected to the divine self. And the goal is the fusion, the joining of the two in the fullest possible way. So Kehelah is then turned on its head. Initially, it seems like a book of dismissal, resignation, fatalism. The sages wanted to conceal it. Because of the last verse, they didn't. So many can read that. Okay, the last verse redeems it. No, the last verse infuses the rest of it. All the work and everything you do, even under the sun, because you can connect now to above the sun. If you connect to above the sun, then the material world is elevated. So we're not looking at asceticism. We're not looking at annihilating. We're not looking at escaping from the vanities of the world. We're looking to channel them and understand the vanities as being an expression of the divine vanity, quote unquote, the divine self, and at the same time understanding our role, in our particular role in this world, of where we express it, and we complement it with each other, because we're all part of this bigger picture. So that's why also Kehelah is read on Sukkot. What's the celebration? Yes, if you read Kehelah superficially, you could say it's all resignation until the last verse. No, the book of Kehelah is a book that brings joy, because it shows you that the material world doesn't have value of its own, and that redeems it, not annihilates it. So what we say is Yediyas Hamachal Chetzer Refuah, have the cure, the awareness is have the cure of an illness. And the question of a wise person is half an answer. That means the fact that you know that the material world is hollow and vain, as King Solomon so eloquently and painfully elaborates, that's what infuses it with the sense of a divine purpose and divine mission. This is the beauty of how the Torah looks at the world. So we're not talking about asceticism, as the Baal Shem Tov says on the verse, Kisir Chamer Senach, when you will see the donkey of your enemy. So you would think that you should neglect it. It's your enemy. What connection do you have to it? So he says, no, Ozev Tazavime. Go help him out, the animal. The Baal Shem Tov explains, when you'll see the material world, Chamer, the same word as Chamer, which means crass materialism. And you'll think, oh, this is an enemy of mine, because it opposes my soul, it's selfish, it's all about itself. He says, no, don't destroy it. Channel it. Teach it that it's basically a stepping stone, a horse upon which to ride that brings you to greater places. Sometimes it says to recognize that it's a horse, or recognize till the point that it doesn't feel like it's a horse. So basically here talking about donkey, the point is treat it well, elevate it, refine it, don't destroy it. And this becomes a fundamental principle also in the Alter Rebbe's Chassidus, that not fasting, not self-punishment, not self-flagellation, different things that some individuals used over history, it's not acceptable. Because the key here is refinement, the refinement of the yesh, and elevating it and sublimating it, not destroying it. So this is the chiddush of the Alter Rebbe, the meaning of yesh. And this brings great celebration when a person recognizes this. Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, you're far more subdued, more internal. not time to dance. You're standing in front of the king, you stand in awe. Yomim Noiroyim, awe, days of awe. Comes Sukkot, and then comes into all the revelations. Yemin Techapkeni. So Smeile Tachas L'Reishi is the beginning of the holidays, Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, that my left, which means it's more days of awe, and on Sukkot, my right arm embraces you. It's an embrace. It's one of love. It's one of joy. It's one of elevation. And this is all that lies in the words that he says in the Geras HaKodesh that I quote, the 20th epistle, that is the yesh, the mere fact that we have this sense of vanity, the thing that everybody struggles with. And some say you just have to accept, some say you have to sublimate. This itself is coming from Atzmus. I think this is one of the most brilliant ideas because he's bypassing. He's basically taking control and saying, no, you have the yesh, we have the yesh. The yesh is a divine force. It's not that force in evolution or a force that is being used in a selfish way. It's a divine force meant to reveal the divine essence in existence. It's unbelievable when you think about it. So this is essentially the story of Vanity Fair. So Thackeray, of course, comes to his conclusions because he doesn't have what to fall back on. Kehela falls back on the fear of God, recognizing this material world is just a limited reality, recognizing the energy within it, and recognizing how all this is divine. All this are divine forces helping us get beyond where we are to the point where we can actually fuse both Giluyim and Etzem, which means that we should both feel a higher reality and also be part of that higher reality with our individuality. This lies at the heart of what Judaism teaches. The Alter Rebbe, in his own unique way, in this Geras HaKodesh Chaf, brings it out in the most powerful way. And he says it, and he wrote it at close to the end of his life, which clearly means it was like a final so-called blast, final surge, letting us know about the true nature of reality. As he explains in all these books, when you continue reading Ayin Beis, you keep comparing, you see, you see this connection. I say Ayin Beis because it's a class I've been teaching, and it reveals a lot of these ideas in this type of personal way and revolutionary way. So to go back to our lives on a more personal level, let me say this. We've all got vanity. We all have a sense of ego. First step is use it for something that's holy. Someone will say, 1 second, I don't want to use my ego in something, an organization or for something holy. I use enough of it at work. But that's itself a very troubling statement. No, at work it's fine, but as soon as it comes to God, suddenly you become holy. Start using your vanity in holy things. Do it for pride. Do it for success. Do it for connections. Do it for your children. Do it for whatever it may be. Because the Talmud says, a person should always study Torah and do mitzvahs, even for ulterior motive, because from the ulterior he'll come to the pure motive. So the first thing is to look at one's life. And fine, do it. Feel good about teaching someone. Feel good inviting someone for a Shabbos. Feel good about it. And train your children to feel good. Because you want their yesh involved. You don't want to tell them, put the yesh aside and we're going to just disconnect, like those trains that you disconnect the car, you disconnect the cargo, or in outer space when they what do they call it? They not untangle, they disengage, and they just reject. No, teach the yesh where it comes from. Teach it to work with others, because when you do this at young age, then the yesh has a certain direction, a certain hadracha, which means direction and guidance. So that's the first thing. Use your ego. And don't say that in the areas of God I want to be humble in business, I'm going to use my ego. No, use your ego also in these matters. Teach somebody something, share something. Integrate your work. Integrate your investment into things that help other people. The next thing is to recognize that there is profundity in your yesh. This self-absorbed reality is a taste for us of what Atzmus is like. And then go visit Atzmus and you'll see it'll be a whole different type of meeting. And then of course it comes back to implementing it all in a structured system. So it's not just about these ideas, it's coming now and bringing it down into reality. So yes, we do eat food. Yes, we do involve the material world. Not total indulgence. because the soul is meant to be the driving force, but you have to engage. And yes, also, we come to a point of sublimating. So we have both and yesh. So besides the fact that you recognize your individuality and its role, you also bring in energy that helps the process along. Because without the energy, we can't rely completely on our yesh that it's just going to find its way. It needs direction. It needs guidance. It needs education. It needs what we're doing right now. And in that sense, Kehelas becomes a symbol of real Vanity Fair, but a Vanity Fair that ends up being one that is higher because you elevate the worlds. The Mishnah says, also in the chronological order, that at age 5 you start teaching Chumash, Mikra, at age 10 you start teaching Mishnah, and so on. The interesting thing, the last section, it goes through age 15, age 18 for Chuppah, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, and he comes to 100, and he says, after 100, a person is over a bottom in Elam. It's as if he's past and bottom in Elam and no longer exists in the world. So the question is asked, the whole Mishnah, everything till that point, from the beginning, that Moses received everything. So the question is asked, if the question is asked that if it all originates from a source, so why don't we focus on the source? Because the answer is no. We want to have it in our existence, which means that if all the positive qualities of the age 5, 10, 15, they're all positive, why suddenly the last one that says Kilu Mesu Bottom Ilaylam, why are you suddenly talking negatively? Because Kilu Mesu Bottle is like every bottle, he's like gone, he's like almost dead. Basically, no. So you have to say that the Mishnah, since it's all positive, you have to say the last statement is also positive. What's the positive? So the explanation is Olam. The word Olam comes from the word concealment. When a person reaches that age, they've come to a point where they realize that over Bottom in Elam, that the concealment that hides the divine presence is no longer that powerful. Their egos are not so powerful. So we're not talking about someone whose world is being annihilated. We're talking about someone who sees beneath the surface and is able to recognize. Till that stage, you go through the stages that how we perceive things. And this corresponds, of course, also with King Solomon. As he got older, he came to realize the soul within the material, not as a power of its own. So it comes down to, in our lives, we have to realize that it's critical in a psychological model to engage and get your ego involved in any positive thing, because then you know that you're also invested. Not just doing it because God said so. Now, if anyone can do things for higher motives, by all means, they're not taking away from that. But there's something to be said to do it for your motives, that you should own it. It should become part of your reality. And then, of course, there's the work of understanding and appreciating these levels of how this yesh came to be in the first place. And that's why we introduce everything we're discussing now. Our mind, our emotions. We're not just action-oriented. We're also trying to become more refined human beings on every possible level. So there you have it, my friends. Vanity Fair. Vanity Fair is, in many ways, the essence of our lives. People vain. But you have the root of vanity in its deeper source. And then, of course, it can manifest below in a very distorted way. Our challenge is to recognize that and to align ourselves, which takes work. It takes work because you have to get away from bad habits and from good habits and so on. So there you have a Vanity Fair, a type of experience that elevates our own vanity, our yesh, to the yesh ha'amiti. Now, being that I am in the Holy Land, I want to say that we have these challenges wherever we go. On one hand, when you see success, you see a renaissance, you see such power, very easy to say, wow, that's beautiful. And I absolutely feel in celebration after what happened to our people 67 years ago, we deserve all this. But at the same time, you have to also not have keich v'eitzim yadi. You have to realize we're not self-made. This comes from a higher power. Like I said with Moses, maintain your identity. Don't become a doormat, but recognize it's coming from a blessing from a higher place. And had someone else received the blessing, they may have done better. These are the two key components that one has to always remember. God should always bless his success. Use your ego. But then come to realize that your ego itself is coming from that higher place. working with others. Each of us complement each other. So, everyone hopefully can take this message and try to do something with it in our personal lives. It's key to real success. Having that push and drive and ambition, which sometimes is ego-oriented, vanity-oriented, but it's a vanity that's being directed in positive ways. And ultimately, anyone that's directing their forces there will elevate everything that they're doing. So my friends, till I come back, we will resume the class on location and, of course, also live and recorded here online. I want to wish everybody a very, very powerful week. A week where you can make your yesh appreciate it. How your yesh is part of a higher reality. And as opposed to Thackeray, who just concludes, these are the puppets, let's put them away. And when you read that book, you realize those actors just play themselves out in every generation. Meaning the actors, meaning the characters in Vanity Fair. You read Keheles, the end of it all is the fear of God. Is the connection to something greater and higher. So I thank you again for your attention. It's great speaking to you about such a, what I think, very valuable topic. All in honor and celebrating the Alter Rebbe's 200th yahrzeit, which was, as I said, 2 weeks ago, the 24th of Tevis. And please stay in touch if you have any questions. Share this any way that we can help. And it's been an honor speaking to you. So thank you very much, and everyone have a very pleasant week.